We're TTB, the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau.
Hello, and welcome to TT Boot Camp for Wineries, Beyond the Basics, AVAs. Before we start, I should mention a few disclaimers. The information that I'm presenting today is designed to help you better understand and comply with the laws and the regulations that TTB administers, but it's not intended to establish any new definitions, interpretations, standards, or procedures, or to change any existing ones. In addition, at some point in the future, this presentation may be made obsolete by changes in laws and regulations. So it's very important to continue to consult the regulations for the most current requirements. And finally, any sample documents that you may see in this presentation are for illustrative purposes only and contain fictitious data. So in this session today, we're going to cover several topics. We're going to start with discussing appellations of origin, and in particular, American Viticultural Areas, or AVAs. We will also talk about the AVA Map Explorer tool that you can find on TTB's website. And we're going to discuss how to apply to establish a brand new AVA or to modify an existing one, as well as TTB's process after you have submitted your petition. And finally, we'll take a look at some additional AVA resources that can help you when you're creating a petition to submit to TTB. So let's start by looking at appellations of origins. What exactly is an appellation of origin? Well, an appellation of origin generally designates the geographic area in which the fruit or other agricultural products used to make the wine was grown. Using an appellation of origin on your label will also indicate that the wine meets certain production requirements, such as the percentage of fruit that is contained in the wine that came from the particular geographic area. Using appellations of origin on your wine labels is often discretionary. However, if you use certain information on your wine labels, then you must use an appellation of origin as well. We'll go into more detail about that in a minute. There are four main types of appellations of origin for American wines. The first is the country, which is, in this particular case, the United States. You can also use the name of a state or up to 3 contiguous states in the U.S. You could use a county name or up to 3 counties that are all within the same state. If you plan on using a multi-state or a multi-county appellation of origin on your wine label, please see Section 4.25 of our regulations for some more information on that topic. And the final type of appellation of origin for American wine is an approved American Viticultural Area, or AVA. And you can see one highlighted on the sample label right here. So I said that usually appellations of origin are voluntary on a wine label, but sometimes they're required. When are they required? Well, you must use some sort of appellation of origin on your wine if you also include a vintage date, a varietal designation, a type designation of varietal significance, a semi-generic designation, or if you make an estate bottled claim. If you make an estate bottled claim, you must use an AVA as an appellation of origin. And keep in mind that an AVA may be only used as an appellation of origin on grape wines. So if you're making cherry wines or cider or mead, sorry, you can't use an AVA label on your wine. Let's take a look at the 3 main types of appellations of origin that are found on wines. The first is using a state's name. If you choose to use the name of a state, at least 75% of the grapes in that wine must come from the state that you are labeling. The wine also must be fully finished within the labeled state or an adjacent state. And all states are automatically eligible for use as an appellation of origin, so you don't need to petition TTB to have your state recognized as an appellation of origin. Another commonly used appellation of origin is the county. If you use a county name on your wine, at least 75% of the grapes must come from the county that you have labeled. It must be fully finished within the same state as the county is located. And like states, the names of all counties are automatically eligible for use as an appellation of origin. So again, you don't have to petition TTB to have your county recognized as an appellation of origin. Now, AVAs are different. With an AVA, at least 85% of the grapes in your wine must come from within that AVA. The wine also must be fully finished somewhere within the state where the AVA is located. And if you're using estate bottled on your label, you can only do that if you are also eligible to use an AVA as an appellation of origin. And unlike states and counties, AVAs must be established by TTB before you can use them on your wine label. So we've seen that AVAs are different from state and county appellations of origin, but what exactly is an AVA? Well, an AVA is a type of appellation of origin that's specific to grape wine. You can use state and county names as appellations of origin on any other kind of fruit or agricultural product wine. You can only use AVAs on grape wine. And an AVA is defined as a grape growing region that has a name, distinguishing features, and a delineated boundary that's established in the TTB regulations at 27 CFR Part 9. And if you go to 27 CFR Part 9, you will see the names and boundary descriptions for all the established AVAs. If you've ever looked at some of those boundary descriptions in the CFR, you'll realize that they're a little confusing. It's kind of hard to visualize exactly where this AVA is located and where it is in relationship to other AVAs or to other major landmarks, such as cities or geographic features or national parks, perhaps. So in order to help people better visualize exactly where these AVAs are located, TTB came up with the AVA Map Explorer tool. And you can find that on our website at the link below. The TTB Map Explorer will show you the boundaries of all established AVAs and even of the proposed AVAs whose proposed rulemaking document has published in the Federal Register. And as you see on this map, you can see purple and orange dots. The established AVAs will be purple dots, and the proposed ones will be orange dots. But on the AVA Map Explorer, you can see more than just the boundaries. You can also learn more about each AVA, including what counties it may contain, and if it's nested within a larger AVA, or if other smaller AVAs are nested within it. Another handy feature of the Map Explorer is that you can use it to determine whether a specific location is within an AVA. All you have to do is enter an address, a city, or a zip code into the search box, and the Map Explorer will pinpoint that particular location. And you'll also see a list of all AVAs that cover that particular point. You can also use the Map Explorer to view historical data, such as the original petition to establish the AVA, any petitions and rulemaking documents that relate to amendments to that particular AVA, and you can also use it to see any comments that have been submitted during the public comment period on that AVA. You can also use the Map Explorer to see the same details for any proposed AVA. The Map Explorer also lets you choose between several different base maps. These different base maps can show you different things. For instance, you can choose a base map that will show you topographic features, such as elevation contours, rivers, lakes, mountains. You can also choose one that lets you see satellite imagery. This one is pretty neat because you might be able to use it to determine if your vineyard is split by a current AVA's boundaries. You can also choose a base map that will show you the roads and their names, as well as various structures. And you can also choose one that will let you see political boundaries, like state and county boundaries. Well, now that we have a little better idea of what exactly an AVA is, let's take a closer look at the AVA petitioning process. AVAs are only established when someone submits a petition. The neat thing about AVAs is that anyone can submit a petition to TTB to establish a new AVA or to modify an existing AVA, such as making it a little bit bigger or making it a little bit smaller. You do not have to have any association with the wine industry in order to submit a petition to TTB. The complete process for creating and submitting a petition is outlined in TTB's regulations at 27 CFR Part 9. One thing to keep in mind is that currently, online petitions are not accepted. So unfortunately, you will have to send us a hard copy of all your petition materials and the required maps. But if at any time you need assistance drafting your petition, you can contact TTB by sending a request via the web form at the URL below, and we'll be happy to help you out. So what do you need to include in an AVA petition? It's important to keep in mind that there is no one set format for an AVA petition, but AVAs must include several different things. First of all, they must include viticultural evidence, that is, some evidence that grape growing is currently taking place in your proposed area. You also need to propose a name for your AVA and provide evidence that supports your claim that the area is known by this particular name. You'll also need to include distinguishing features, which are descriptions of the geographic or climatic features that will distinguish your proposed AVA from the surrounding regions, and that also have an impact on how grapes are grown. And of course, you're going to need to provide some evidence to support these claims of distinguishing features. Unfortunately, we just can't take you at your word. You'll also need to provide a boundary description that's written out and follows your boundary in a clockwise manner from point to point. And finally, you will need to provide the appropriate full-size paper USGS topographic maps with the boundary drawn on it. We strongly suggest you use colored pencil for drawing the boundary in case some changes need to be made during the rulemaking process. Let's take a closer look at each of these required elements. The first, viticultural evidence. How do you prove that grape growing is taking place in your proposed area? The easiest way is to provide the total number of wine grape vineyards and the total vineyard acreage within your proposed AVA. If you don't have an exact number, it's okay to approximate. TTB does not have a regulation that sets a minimum number of vineyards or minimum number of vineyard acres that have to be within an AVA, but viticultural activity should be distributed sufficiently to show that it is a grape growing region, and it also helps to justify the size of your AVA. And to show that your vineyards are sufficiently distributed throughout your proposed AVA, it's very helpful to include some sort of map that shows the approximate locations of the vineyards within your AVA. There are some common pitfalls that you might encounter when you're trying to provide viticultural evidence. The first thing, believe it or not, is that there may not be any viticulture in your proposed area. This is a big problem because TTB requires it to be a grape-growing region. Grapes must be currently grown within your proposed area in order for us to consider it. Another problem is that your vineyards are not distributed throughout your proposed AVA. You want to make sure that your vineyards aren't all clustered together in a single area within your proposed AVA. If you find that they are, you may want to consider reducing the size of your proposed AVA to include the areas where viticulture is currently taking place. Another thing to avoid is single vineyard AVAs. AVAs should represent an entire grape growing region and not just be a vanity project for someone's private vineyard. Now, in rare cases, a single vineyard region may truly be distinctive, and you may have a very convincing reason for having only one vineyard in your proposed AVA. But these cases are quite rare, and you should try to avoid single vineyard AVAs if possible. The next part of the petition that we will talk about is the proposed AVA name. You'll need to provide evidence that the area is currently used, that the name is currently used to describe the area. Your proposed name must also apply to the entire proposed AVA. For instance, you don't want to name your 5-county AVA after a single town that only exists in one in one of those 5 counties, unless you can prove that the name of that town is used to describe the entire 5-county area that you are proposing. Your proposed name also must be supported by evidence. Appropriate evidence would include things such as geographical landmarks within your proposed AVA, like a mountain or a lake or a creek or a valley. You can also use the names of roads that are within or pass through your proposed AVA. One of the most common types of evidence is using the names or advertisements of businesses and organizations that are either within or that serve your proposed AVA. The same goes with the names of government entities within or serving your proposed AVA. You can also perhaps find name evidence in recent magazine, newspaper, or web articles. And tourism materials are often a great source that can be overlooked. Take a look at tourism materials and see how tourist organizations refer to your area. And finally, real estate listings are another great source of potential name evidence. Look for properties that are located within your proposed AVA and see how the real estate agent refers to the area. Like other parts of the petition, your proposed name section can come across a few pitfalls. One of these may be that your proposed name has the same name as other regions in the country. In that case, we may require you to add a geographic modifier to help the consumer better understand exactly where your proposed AVA is located. An example would be if you wanted to name your proposed AVA after Middleburg, the main town in your region. Well, there are an awful lot of places called Middleburg in the United States, and consumers would be very confused trying to figure out which of those many Middleburgs your proposed AVA related to. So we might require you to add the name of a state or a county to help better identify exactly which Middleburg you're talking about. In this example, the AVA name became Middleburg, Virginia. You also want to avoid relying solely on evidence that is not independent of the petitioner. For example, don't rely only on the name of the petitioner's winery or articles about that winery for your proposed name. A good example would be if you had an organization called Wally's Woods Wine Growers, and they submitted a petition for an AVA to be called Wally's Woods. But the only evidence that they included was articles written by or about wineries that were members of the Wally Woods Wine Growers. That wouldn't be considered to be independent of the petitioner, and TTB would not accept that name if that was the only source of information. So perhaps you could look for something else that uses that name. Like you may find an advertisement for the 14th annual Wally's Woods Music Festival, sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce. That has absolutely nothing to do with the wine industry, and it uses the name Wally's Woods, so it can be considered to be independent of the petitioner. You're going to need to have at least one piece of evidence that is independent of the petitioner for your proposed name to be accepted. Another pitfall is if you provide only historical evidence of the name use. It's perfectly fine to talk about the history of the name of your proposed AVA, but our regulations require that you also provide current name use evidence. And finally, you also want to avoid providing only anecdotal or testimonial evidence. While this can be part of your name evidence, TTB regulations state that it cannot be your only form of name evidence. The next section of your petition that we're going to talk about is the distinguishing features, and this is going to perhaps be the meat of your petition. In this section, you're going to describe the natural features that distinguish your proposed AVA from the surrounding regions. Examples could be climate, like your growing degree days, or the growing season length, or the annual rainfall. You could also talk about topography, such as the elevation, or the slope angle or slope aspects. And you can also talk about soils. But you should choose the feature or features that best distinguish your proposed AVA. And yes, it is possible to have an AVA with only one distinguishing feature. It's also important to keep in mind that you can use different features to distinguish your region from the different directions. For example, rainfall may distinguish your proposed AVA from the regions to the north and south, but not to the east and west. And this is perfectly fine. You simply have to find one other thing that will distinguish you from the region to the east and the region to the west. such as soils or topography. Like name evidence, you're going to have to provide distinguishing feature evidence to support your claims, because again, we're not just going to take you at your word. And finally, you're going to need to describe specifically how each of your distinguishing features has an effect on viticulture. For instance, does it affect canopy growth, or bud break, or harvest dates, or root depth, things like that. Be as specific as possible. Some common pitfalls that you might encounter with your distinguishing features include missing your data from the surrounding areas. You must include data from your surrounding regions for comparison. It's important to note that those surrounding regions do not have to be within an existing AVA. They simply need to be fairly near your proposed boundary. Believe it or not, some people also forget to include data from within their proposed AVA. They may talk about how the climate is different all around them, but forget to provide actual evidence that was taken from within their proposed AVA. A lot of times people will have very good descriptions of how their features are different from the surrounding regions, but they forget to talk about how each of those features can affect viticulture. That is a requirement of our regulations, so please make sure to include it when you're talking about your distinguishing features. And finally, if you're using climate data in your petition, make sure that you don't have a very, very short time period, such as a single year. You'll need to be able to show that there's a climate trend, and so it's best to use a longer period of time, say 3 years, but the longer, the better. Just try to avoid using a single year's worth of data. Now that you have the meat of your petition written, it's time to turn towards the maps and boundary description. First, you're going to need to purchase your full-size paper maps from the U.S. Geological Survey. You can go to their website and use their map locator feature to be able to identify exactly which maps you're going to need to purchase from them. You're going to need to make sure that you provide just the maps that make up the boundary, so you don't have to worry about finding the maps that will cover the interior of your proposed AVA as well. Next, you will need to mark your boundary. And again, it's best to use colored pencil in case we need to make changes during the rulemaking process. We'll need to use features that are clearly shown on the maps, such as elevation contours, marked elevation points, roads, creeks, rivers, lakes, state boundaries, things of that nature. You can also use imaginary lines that are drawn between two features on a map that are marked on the map. So for instance, you can draw a straight line between a marked mountaintop and the intersection of two roads. That's fine. If your AVA shares a boundary with any existing AVA, you should clearly mark and identify that particular portion. That way we can make sure that your two boundaries actually touch each other and don't accidentally partially overlap or create an unwanted gap between the two AVAs. Next, you'll need to write a complete boundary description. Choose a starting point on your map and then go point to point around the map back to the beginning point in a clockwise direction. Again, refer to features that do appear clearly on the map. If you're using a road that's name does not appear on the map, but you know the name, then you can simply describe it as an unnamed road known locally as whatever the name of the road is. And finally, once you've created your map and your boundary description, it's a good idea to keep a copy for yourself for reference. That way, if TTB has any questions during either the review process of your petition or during the actual rulemaking process, we can contact you and you'll have a very good idea of what it is we're talking about. So what happens once you've written this petition and submitted it to TTB? Well, TTB will, within 30 days of receipt, send you a written acknowledgement that we got your petition. We will also then perform an initial review of the petition to determine whether it contains all those basic elements that we just talked about. If you're missing any of those required elements, we will return your petition to you with a letter that explains the deficiencies. At any point, you may then submit a revised petition. You are not limited to the number of times you can resubmit a petition. And finally, if your petition does meet the regulatory requirements, we will send you a letter to tell you whether or not TTB intends to proceed with the rulemaking process. So, say you've gotten a letter saying that your petition is perfected and we are going to proceed with the rulemaking process. That mean that you can suddenly start using your AVA name on a label? Unfortunately not. The good news is the next step is all on TTB. You as the petitioner can just sit back, relax, and try to be patient because this process is a long and winding road. It starts out first by drafting a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NPRM. This is TTB's job again, and the NPRM will summarize the information that you provided in your petition. Once the NPRM is drafted, it will then have to go through TTB review and also have to go through review at the Treasury Department because TTB is a bureau of the Treasury Department. Once TTB and Treasury have completed their review and signed off on it, the proposed rule is then sent to the Office of the Federal Register, where it publishes in the Federal Register and is open for public comment. The comment period is typically 60 days, and during this time, anybody can read the petition, read the proposed rule, and submit comments that they want. After the comment period closes, TTB has to evaluate the comments and determine if any response is necessary to these comments. Most AVA proposals get very few comments, and some don't even get any, but that's okay because the rulemaking process is not a popularity contest. An AVA can still be established even if we did not receive any comments. What we're wanting to see is if there are comments that contain substantive evidence that either support or call into question the evidence that was included in the petition. If we receive no comments, or if we receive comments that don't provide any sort of substantive evidence that calls into question what was in the petition, then TTB drafts the final rule document. And this final rule document will again go through the TTB and Treasury review process, just like the proposed rule did. And then once that's completed, it will publish in the Federal Register. That means at this point when it's published, your AVA is established and you can now use it on a wine label? No, unfortunately, there's still one last hurdle that you have to cross. By law, regulations cannot go into effect until 30 days after the final rule publishes. This is known as the effective date. And that effective date is also the earliest date you can apply for a certificate of label approval with the AVA name on the label. If you submit a COLA before that effective date with the name of the AVA on it, it will be rejected. So be patient and wait until that effective date. I told you this was a long and winding road, didn't I? So now that we've gone through what happens once TTB gets your petition, that's pretty much the final step of the AVA process, and your AVA is established. And that's a lot of information we've covered today. So here's a list of some web resources that you can use to help you draft your petition. We have a web page on wine appellations of origin, a web page just for AVAs, a web page that tells you how to apply to establish or modify an AVA, and we even have a handy-dandy AVA manual for petitioners that goes into much greater detail the different steps that I listed. And finally, we have the AVA Map Explorer tool. We also have this web form that you can submit a comment to if you have any questions during your petition process. Or you can use snail mail to send us a question. This is also the same address where you will need to send your completed petition. So again, thank you very much for your time, and we hope that you have a better understanding now of appellations of origin and AVAs in particular. Thank you.
Visit TTB's official YouTube channel at USTTB.gov for more TTB-related content. And remember to click subscribe so you'll always know when we upload new videos.